Chris, good morning. Welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
For everyone watching the interview, Chris Dede, formerly the Timothy E. Worth Professor in Learning Technologies at Harvard for 22 years, now a Senior Research Fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. You can get to know his work at chrisdede.com. Chris is also the founder or a founder of the Silver Lining for Learning podcast, which gets a lot of play on social or through social media, interested educators that are following his continued work. You can see that podcast at silverliningforlearning.org. His article for our autumn issue of the journal, We Have the Power to Invent the Future, was a wonderful synthesis of two previous pieces he had written. They talked about, one, what children should master to cope with a very uncertain, turbulent, and dangerous future, and how better methods of assessment are needed to provide a compass for this journey. When we discussed the article ahead of time, Chris, you were talking about how your thinking had evolved. Can you talk us through that a little from those original pieces and where you are now in your thinking in this very huge topic?
Well, both of those pieces were originally written in the spring of 2020,
Yeah,
after COVID had shut things down.
yeah,
But before there really had been the emergence of online and hybrid learning at the level that developed because the pandemic went on for quite a while.
yeah,
And then, since then, Gen AI has come along,
yeah,
which has changed a lot of things. And now, although the COVID crisis has receded, we're in a difficult time in history with many things going on internationally, nationally,
yes,
and so on. So there is a similar feeling to the feeling that I had in spring 2020, which is that the world was going out of control and becoming a very dangerous place. And I didn't know what was going to happen next or how to make a difference under those circumstances. And of the things that influence what I wrote in 2020, I think the two biggest things are, first, that now there is an infrastructure for online interaction that just wasn't there before. I get an invitation from, Tibet to do a keynote for their university.
yeah,
And, it's seamless from their point of view. They've already got, the video conferencing system and the room and all the technical stuff in place, which certainly would have not been the case prior to the pandemic. And that in turn opens up something important to Gen AI, which is that AI depends on really big data. You need huge data sets for AI machine learning to do the kinds of pattern recognition that it does. And those data sets become even larger if you include natural language, now that we have natural language processing. And so the implications for assessment that creates are profound, more than they were certainly 5 years ago. But in a sense, both of those things simply underscored what I was saying. They didn't cause me to regret some of what I wrote or to feel that it was out of date or to feel that it needed some major adjustment in the direction it was going. It just has opened up some possibilities for doing this at scale that I wouldn't have been able to cite in 2020. Um, so a lot has changed.
yeah.
And I would write them. I mean, I did rewrite them to some extent for
Yeah.
your issue, but I didn't start over again from
No,
scratch.
no, no, no.
And I don't think I would have needed to, because really, uh, the same goals and opportunities are there. Some of the means have become more powerful.
They truly have. And such an era of disruption. And as you said, coming at us from so many different directions. You wrote about it so wonderfully that there's a sea change, and there's no magical red slippers to take us back to Kansas. Um, and we need to accept that the past is no longer sustainable. And we have to accept that we're moving into an historically unprecedented, continuously disrupted present and future. But you also put a personal touch to it. You said towards the end, I tell my children we need a younger generation of heroes to shape the coming half century. And I love that. Um, as educators and parents, we have a unique spin on all of this because we have a real investment. When you think about your children and you think about how uncertain the next half century is, what do you envision for them? What do you hope for them in all of this? Setting aside the academic understandings and the expertise you bring to the table, just as a parent, how do you look at this?
Well, I think speaking not just for myself as a parent, but for parents in general, which is
Yeah.
what I did in what I wrote.
Yes.
Um, if kids graduate from any level of education with a love of learning, with a strong sense of their own ability as learners to master new things
Mhm.
relatively easily,
Yep.
if they have a high degree of appropriate self-confidence
Mhm.
and uh, have passions, individual passions that they want to achieve, know how to play well with others. Um, it doesn't matter what they know.
Right.
I mean, that's almost true. It doesn't matter what they know. But what we do instead is stuff them full of things that a chatbot can do and don't do any of those other things that are the most important. Students are graduating. They have negative opinions of themselves. They're demotivated by learning because it's been drudgery for them.
Yeah.
And they don't even know what their passions are because they've been told that your passion is to do well on a test and go to an elite university. That's your passion. So um, it wouldn't be hard to do a better job than we've been doing.
Fair to say. And you make an even more compelling case in the article. You say if we continue the way we've been teaching, we're dooming graduates to reduced agency in every other aspect of their life. And
Yes,
when you hear
that
that,
that yeah. Well, part of I mean, I didn't say this in the article, but
mhm,
um, part of my frustration with the dead hand of the past is that it's very prevalent at Harvard. And
right,
the first thing that Harvard did when the pandemic receded was to throw out everything that they'd been doing in online learning, except for the Division of Continuing Education and except for setting up online learning programs as kind of cash cows.
right,
And I find that incredibly discouraging.
yeah,
Um, but it is the case that um, often institutions that are perhaps overly impressed by their accomplishments are much more difficult to change than institutions that know that they're struggling and that
right.
are willing to try new things and put the students first and really try to make a difference.
Well, and I see that even among our colleagues during, remember back to 2020, there was such a hope among educators that as hard as this disruptive force was, this pandemic, that it would be an impetus for change, that there'd be no going back because look at the things we're going to have to do to deliver learning and create environments for kids who are at home. Um, and yet as soon as the social distancing restrictions were relaxed and kids were coming back to schools, all the backsliding started. And we went right back to the industrial model. It's what we're comfortable with. We understand the name of the game all the way down to test scores. And so, in some sense, we have to do a bit of a mea culpa. Um, there's certainly, as you said in the article, there's wonderful pockets of innovation, teachers out there trying things and pushing envelopes. But for a lot of us, we know what we know. We know what our path to success was to get here. So why would we rock the boat?
Yeah, and it's pervasive throughout the educational system.
Yeah,
I mean, I remember pre-pandemic going out to districts and speaking to groups of parents, among other stakeholders, and talking about, lifetime learning and uh, the need for a transformative change. And almost the first question always was, so when is Harvard changing its admissions policies? And fair enough,
yeah,
fair
yeah, yeah.
enough, because the problem really starts at the top,
It does.
where one can understand if you have 40,000 applicants and you want to let in 5,000,
Right.
that you need some kind of screening mechanisms.
Yeah.
And at the time, Gen AI, well, Gen AI is used for a lot of bad screening, but
Hmm.
we can imagine better Gen AI being capable of looking at things like personal statements and recognizing when somebody is coloring outside the lines
Right.
and impassioned about what they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, but Harvard is perfect, as and other elite universities are perfectly
Right.
happy to say, well, we're getting the best of the best
Right.
because they have high scores on these standardized tests.
Yes.
And of course that trickles down, and the parents are rightly saying, now what I wanted to answer was your child can actually get a better
Right.
education at a teaching and learning
Right.
university than at
Right.
an elite research one university, but I don't know that they would have believed that.
And I think that that was the status quo until the last 5 years, that parents, teachers, everyone, decision makers, we all knew the path and we all bought into, even if one group started to talk about innovation, the other groups would reinforce, no, 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 this is what we want. This is the formula for success. So in a very real sense, as much as we didn't sign up for any of this, and nobody would have wished this on anybody, this is the reason why there's no turning back now,
Yeah.
because the things that are in play are not going to allow us to just be comfortable and sit back and go back.
Well, and the other thing that I would say about elite universities, including Harvard, is that a lot of the people now who are creating a lot of political problems were educated at elite universities. It's not that they didn't get a lot of knowledge. It's not that that they weren't smart,
No,
but they had no ethics whatsoever.
right.
And I never hear that discussed at Harvard, right?
No,
I mean,
right.
there's no sense of looking back and saying, how did we contribute to this? Never,
Right.
never does that topic come up. And I suspect it's the same as a lot of other places as well. But that's going to continue then
It
until,
perpetuates. Yeah.
until we go back to what in my youth was called the liberal arts education.
Right. Right. Absolutely. You reference your piece in the article, Preparing Students for a Lifelong Disruptive Future, the 60-year curriculum. Can you talk a little about that?
Well, in 2020, before the pandemic, um, John Richards, my colleague at Harvard, and I published a co-edited book based on a term from continuing education, the concept that you maybe needed to dedicate 60 years of your life for preparing for work, for doing work, and for coming out of work with a plan for when you stop working, because if you're going to live to be 100, you're not going to be able to work for 30 years and have enough money.
Right.
That it's extending the lifespan also means extending the period of work.
Yeah.
And we said that that learning had to be transformative because uh, failure to reach the UN sustainability goals, um, climate change,
Yeah.
different kinds of disruptive technologies, and so on. Well, we so underestimated the situation I mean,
Yes,
that part of the book was considered extremely controversial, but since then we've had the pandemic, the advent of Gen AI, which whether you believe it's great or not, is certainly
yeah,
disruptive.
yes,
And um, now the rise of authoritarianism across the
yeah,
world
yes.
and subsequent issues that are emerging from that. So somebody, now could look back and say, boy, they sure pulled their punches. But
Right.
at the time, we thought we were being pretty dramatic about it.
Well, and you had to be to make the case. I mean, but it is showing itself to be the reality. And I think as, for practitioners in classrooms, they're seeing the new generations coming into classrooms are showing us that they think differently, they see the world differently, and they have very imminent needs that they're expressing. And you address it in the article that they're non-academic passions, the things that they're doing outside of school that they're bringing into school today. They're already creators. They're already online with followers. They're already defining success for themselves in their personal lives. And so when they come into a classroom and they're being presented with a very fixed scope and sequence of stuff, um, there's this disconnect immediately about what
Yeah,
they're showing us and what
yeah.
we're delivering. Um, that's going to be a very gradual shift. As you said, institutions are very slow to change. And those of us who are innovators are in classrooms trying to show what that can look like. But in terms of a framework, a way of accommodating students where they are now, instead of trying to fill them as empty vessels that need knowledge. Um, how do you see that path forward in all of this?
Well, Charles Fidel is someone that I've known for a long time who has been very concerned about preparing students for the future and in particular about curriculum.
Mm,
And at the Center for Curriculum Redesign, he has published a number of books that really discuss in detail how the curriculum might alter, not to become less disciplinary,
mm,
but to emphasize the aspects of the discipline that can really empower students to realize their passions through, for example, project-based learning,
yes.
and to eliminate a lot of the stuff from the curriculum serves no useful purpose. So I think his work is really good. Now it's been moderately influential, and that's how I would describe my own work as well. It You can look at the people who agree and feel good about that, but if you look at the proportion of people who are untouched by it, it's a
Yeah.
little daunting.
It really is. And part of it today, and this is a side note, it's just getting people's attention. There's just so much going on in people's lives that even get them to stop and let it register is a challenge in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, back to the conversation about classrooms and students today. Very trendy to talk about personalizing the learning, that we want to be able to customize that learning for each student based on their passions, needs, interests. Um, and generative AI can have a breakthrough there that, when you talk to a teacher 10 years ago about personalizing learning, their eyes would glaze over with all that entails, being able to customize. But generative AI allows so much more to happen that doesn't require all that rote preparation by the teacher. Um, you pioneer this kind of work. So talk to us about that. How and the ethics of it. How do we allow AI to become our partner in personalizing learning while still allowing for all those wonderful human traits that you talk about, the judgment and the ethics and the creativity that only humans can bring to the equation?
Well, one of the things that I've been talking about in recent speeches is what I call a digital community of practice
Hmm.
of AI to agents. So let's just take the university as an example.
Sure.
Um, People like me that teach fairly large courses have numerous teaching assistants. And those teaching assistants are important as a mechanism for personalization, because if I'm facing 80 students, even if I do a lot of discussion and wander around among small group, I'm
Sure.
not going to get to know the individual students by and large as well as the teaching assistants do, that each have responsibility for a manageable number of students.
Sure.
And then they can come to me and say, well, Joe is interested in this, and I know it's one of your interests, or most of the students are confused by this kind of analogy that you're using.
Yeah.
Could you modify it, or
Yeah.
whatever?
Yeah.
And what would be really terrific would be if that happened across courses.
Mm.
So maybe Anne is taking statistics, leadership, um, artificial intelligence, and ethics.
Hmm.
Um, if the teaching assistants were to get together once a week and say, here's how Anne is doing in our course, and I think her enthusiasm and expertise in math could inform this work in artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
and her interest in ethics could be fueled by bringing up some problems with AI and ethics and so on. Now that's never going to happen,
Right.
because who has the bandwidth in
Yeah.
terms of these teaching assistants to do something like that?
Yeah.
But if some of the teaching assistants are Gen AI, and
Hmm.
my colleague Ashok Goel, the head of the National AI Institute on Adult Learning and Online Education, for which I'm the director of research,
Yes.
the Jill Watson tool that he's developed is
Hmm.
quite capable of doing that. And I've talked to Ashok about the idea that in addition to informing the instructor and teaching assistants within course, one can imagine a future in which every student gets discussed by kind of a community of practice of teaching assistants that have cross-course ideas.
Hmm.
That would really be very powerful for personalization.
Yeah.
Now, of course, people who are worried about privacy and security start tearing their hair out at the roots.
Right.
But educators have done a very poor job of making their case for this, because
Hmm.
in medicine, this kind of sharing takes place all the time.
Yes.
And that information is far more sensitive than anything that we do in education. And so we're, blocking non-sensitive information, really,
Yeah.
uh, while at the same time, in a different field, we're quite willing to recognize the benefits of sharing information. So educators just need to kind of find a way to get past that, have some compelling case examples that really open things up. Because parents typically, if they won the lottery,
Yeah.
and so they could afford a really high-end small liberal arts college,
Yeah.
and they were trying to pick which one, the college that said, our faculty really talk to one another about your student so that the whole faculty gets to know your student well and can personalize to them, they'd say, great, sign me up. So again, there's just sort of, the opportunity has to be recognized, because that has not existed as a realistic opportunity before. But then there's a lot of work to be done about unlearning some of
Right.
the misconceptions that people have.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the innate fears that come with it, that losing control of things and not allowing it to be human.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you mentioned the Watson tool. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How do you see that becoming a great example of what can be done?
So Jill Watson started prior to the development of the Institute. It actually began about 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And it began as a teaching assistant that simply could answer questions.
Hmm.
Because as anyone who teaches knows, um, there's a lot of questions that come from the fact that students don't read the directions. And it's quite possible to build an AI agent that does read the directions, that can answer those types of questions, simple
Mhm.
informational questions. But then Jill Watson kept morphing and changing. So some of the students fall behind. The instructor can't hold the whole class behind to
Right.
try to make sure that they catch up. So some kind of tutoring function is useful. Some of the students um, from less privileged backgrounds may really have no idea about how to use the library. And so
Right.
a library assistant is helpful. If you have a big course and you feel that having small learning groups where you're partnered with peers that you can teach something to and they can teach something to you,
Yeah.
there's a social assistant that can do that. And if you're doing video-based teaching, having a video system that can, if you stop the video and say, type in, well, what about this? To have an AI behind the video that understands the video deeply is a narrow thing and can
Yeah.
answer that. So I think that the institute that I'm part of
Mhm.
as a team has done a wonderful job of creating tools that are capable of not of taking over a course,
Right.
but of providing the kind of sort of intelligence to the instructor, strategic intelligence about students, and at the same time taking some of the low level burden off of instructors.
You talk about immersive authentic simulations and even stealth uh, simulations. That's kind of the future of this because in education, assessment has been the tail wagging the dog for a long time. And if we can break that grip, we really have an opportunity to make these strides. Can you give us a quick description of what this looks like?
Sure. In fact, after I submitted the article to you, one of the
Yeah.
things that happened is a small team of volunteers, including me,
Hmm.
have been working to develop a negotiation curriculum that would be virtually free because the people who most need to learn about negotiation often cannot afford the Harvard Business School courses on
Right.
the subject.
Right.
And immigrants in particular are trying to negotiate across cultures, which is
Mhm.
really difficult.
Yeah.
And the big breakthrough in negotiation education, and this is something that I attended a conference last March where everyone was excited about this, is the
Yeah.
opportunity for practice
Yes.
using the immersive authentic simulation where, unlike another student in the class, the AI can really portray a used car dealer or a landlord or your boss when you want to raise.
Yeah.
So we took the pilot that we developed and we've now put it up online on the website of the Next Level Lab, which is
Mhm.
one of the research organizations I belong to at the Ed School at Harvard.
Mhm.
And I've also put the links to it on my website and an article about it on my website
Right.
that you referenced at the start,
Yes.
chrisdede.com.
Yes.
And posted on LinkedIn and said, come and try this, and tell us what you think about the chatbot. Where
Yeah.
is it successful as a practice partner? What is it missing that you would like to see happening?
Yeah.
And I think next generation, um, doing better things is where the real future lies, not doing things better.
Yeah.
And these immersive authentic simulations for practice, again, it's like the community of teaching assistants. There's no way of making it happen with human beings,
No.
but we can make it happen at a realistic level with Gen AI agents.
It's fantastic. And the article was just a nice clarion call for all of us who who have been there. We've watched this progression. Our careers have lived what you've described. And yet you tell us we can invent the future. We are not victims of our circumstances. We have the wherewithal to drive this. And as you said, to create examples and make the case for what this can be. So we cannot thank you enough for the article and for all the work you do and for being a voice for the future of education.
Well, Walter, I want to thank you for your leadership the causes that you champion, the legacy that you create. And it's a wonderful venue for me. So thank you very much for your service as well. Take care.